"Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." A quote from the Bhagavad Gita, immortalized by J. Robert Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb. In 2023, Christopher Nolan added his trademark style to Oppenheimer's story, and that film is the topic of today's episode. There will be spoilers ahead, and please check out horrorexchange.com for our Gooligan clothing, but for now, this is why Oppenheimer is nightmare fuel. The works of Nolan are complex narratives with multiple layers that can be unfolded, and Oppenheimer is no exception to this rule, bouncing back and forth between multiple time periods, including the investigation of the Oppenheimer security hearing. However, in this video, the layers I am going to focus on are Oppenheimer as a person, the Manhattan Project, and the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, as these are the areas which possess the greatest amount of nightmare fuel in the film to me. Prior to this breakdown, I'll also enforce that my thoughts are based foremost on the film's depiction of these people and historical events more than the reality. The earliest we see in the timeline is Oppenheimer as a student at Cambridge. He's a brilliant but scattered young man. He experiences troubling visions and contends with bouts of anxiousness. He's unstable and is homesick for America, while his teacher, Patrick Blackett, places barriers around him. A pivotal moment comes when Blackett denies Oppenheimer the freedom to access a lecture by Niels Bohr, one of the great quantum theorists. Oppenheimer's response to this demonstrates a key factor of his character, that he likes to freely think and express himself on an intellectual level and doesn't submit to the boundaries of other people's agendas. He wants to do what benefits him the most, so ignoring Blackett's instructions, he laces the apple on his desk with cyanide and heads to the lecture regardless. Thankfully, he regrets and corrects this decision by getting rid of the apple before it is bitten by Bohr's, not Blackett. Yet, even though Oppenheimer prevents his original plan from happening, the existence of that original plan is troubling. It shows an impulsiveness and spitefulness underlying in Oppenheimer's character, a selfish stubbornness that is willing to strike back at anyone who gets in the way of what he wants. In this case, he sees a chance of learning being taken away from him for unsubstantial reasons, and reactively, poison was the best answer. Even though throughout the film Oppenheimer reflects on his decisions in time, many of them still possess the power of damaging others, yet it's his unbridled sense of self-aggrandizing that runs through his blood. His character traits are even pulled up on later by head of the Manhattan Project Leslie Groves. Oppenheimer is described as unstable, theatrical, egotistical, and neurotic, amongst other scathing adjectives. But in response, Oppenheimer openly suggests his own brilliance being one of his main characteristics, something which he does more than once in the film. Not only does this support the egotistical description, but more worryingly, it shows that there's a niggling self-righteousness within him. Oppenheimer has a brilliant mind, and he is braggadocious about that, especially when he is told that he is actually important and not just somebody labelled as important. But despite his brilliant mind as an intellectual, he is far from a brilliant person in his personal life. Oppenheimer is a womanizer, something which is also pulled up on by Groves. He has a sexual relationship with Jean Tatlock, then seduces Kitty Puning, who at the time was married. Kitty then marries Oppenheimer, but during their marriage, he has not one but two affairs, once sleeping with Tatlock again as a one-night stand, the other being an affair numerous years in length with Ruth Tolman. Not only was Oppenheimer unfaithful to Kitty on numerous occasions, but the Ruth affair in particular is hurtful because it was Ruth's husband, Richard Tolman, who was the only one to have anything positive to say about Oppenheimer to Groves. Richard said Oppenheimer had integrity, yet was sleeping with his wife behind his back. Integrity meaning strong moral principles. That's what Richard thought Oppenheimer possessed, but the actuality here was far from it. There are consequences to Oppenheimer's actions, with Tatlock committing suicide after her genuine love for Oppenheimer wasn't reciprocated, though there are real theories that she was assassinated due to her communist affiliations. However, on the surface, Oppenheimer believes that Tatlock's death is the result of decisions he made and ones he didn't. But Kitty addresses this by telling him, "You don't get to commit the sin and then ask all of us to feel sorry for you when there are consequences. This statement is echoed by Lewis Strauss, who describes Oppenheimer as a martyr. It's as though in these circumstances, Oppenheimer is seen as somebody who makes rash choices, but then when things go wrong, he hopes for sympathy, as though he is a victim rather than an aggressor. Oppenheimer is quite happy to satisfy his inner cravings without contemplating the ones in the emotional blast radius. The actions of Oppenheimer created ripples, just like the raindrops hitting the puddle in the deliberate opening shot of the film. But none of these ripple effects have had a lasting impact on the world quite like the Manhattan Project. This project was brought about to create the first nuclear weapons in order to win the Second World War, a collaboration between the United States, the United Kingdom and Canada. A makeshift town was built in Los Alamos as the place where the bombs would be designed, and the greatest Allied scientific minds could conduct their research into developing the weapons. The world was subject to a nuclear arms race, with the US and Germany locked in intellectual combat. Who can develop a bomb first? Will it be Oppenheimer and his team, or Heisenberg and his team? Well, Oppenheimer has an agenda that drives him through the development process. He is Jewish. His cathartic desire to contribute towards the bomb is that his people are the ones who are being herded into camps. And I do find this to be quite a tragic backstory. Germany's extermination of the Jewish people, which in itself is one of history's notorious war crimes, was something that fueled the creation of the deadliest weapon in history, taking that mass death of civilians and using it to incentivize something that would go on to causing the mass death of civilians, like pouring gasoline onto the fire, a reaction that makes the situation more destructive. This is something that is seen by some as the only answer, that using such a bomb would save a greater number of lives in the long run, making the choice of ending innocent lives to put the brakes on the war machine. However, this is something that Bose approaches Oppenheimer about, telling him that whatever they end up discovering will outlive the Nazis. He can foresee a future where the creation of such weapons will go beyond one political agenda or one country. The Nazis were the biggest threat to humanity, and yet Bose suggests that the bombs will make the Nazis pale in comparison. Still, the work goes on, powering through even beyond the death of Hitler. This bewilders people working on the Manhattan Project, as the perceived cause of creating the bomb in the first place is no longer a danger. So why are they continuing? It's Oppenheimer who convinces the continuation. There's still dangers in the Pacific to deal with, and in the future, the existence of such weapons could lead to cooperation between nations, making nuclear weapons deterrents. Don't do anything stupid or we'll rain hell down on you and your people. Hell is an apt description of what is unveiled by the bomb test, named the Trinity test in reference to the poetry of John Donne. Batter my heart, three-personed God, from Holy Sonnet 14, which Oppenheimer references in the film. There are many religious connotations in the film, including how the successful application of nuclear weaponry is a terrible revelation of divine power. In Oppenheimer's words, the line is blurred here between man and God, with Oppenheimer unlocking the power of God, perhaps even becoming godlike in the process. But again, there's a desired level of sympathy from Oppenheimer, saying prior to the Trinity test that these things are hard on your heart, echoing the batter my heart line from the poem. It's his heart that is being bombarded, i.e. his emotions are being severely tested to their limits, as though he is taking the brunt of the force himself over anyone else. The Trinity test in the film is realised with terrifying beauty. The sheer drop of music at the time of the detonation, after such a build-up, then only hearing Oppenheimer's breathing as he looks on stunned, almost in admiration of the swirling flames. There's a real gorgeousness to what he's witnessing in his eyes, before once again hearing the destroyer of worlds quote and the booming shockwave sonically smacks the viewer. This scene has had audience members around the world waiting with bated breath. These people just saw the deadliest weapon ever made by man go off, the first of its kind, and that leads them to celebrate and party. This makes sense because it was the realised goal of a very long and difficult project, but in hindsight, think about what is being celebrated here. These people are applauding the creation of something that could destroy the world. Even the test itself itself had a near zero chance of igniting the atmosphere and never stopping, but that didn't prevent the test. The odds were low, but not impossible, and yet the test was still carried out. There was genuine potential for the destruction of Earth and everyone on it based on scientific theory, and yet the desire to create the bomb for the glory of America was worth the risk of eradicating everyone else. And that is a startling contemplation. However, all goes well, at least to what America wanted, as a teary-eyed Oppenheimer celebrates also. There's an initial delight. He's achieved what he set out to do for him. He became one of the most important men to ever live. He gained the spotlight. He wound up on the covers of Time and Life magazines. He was a star. But there's a line in this film, according to science, which describes exactly what happened to Oppenheimer after the fact. When it comes to suns becoming black holes, the bigger the star, the more violent its demise. Oppenheimer became the biggest star in the Western world, and his demise certainly was a violent one. The nuclear bombs he and his team designed were used in the bombings of Japanese cities Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which, when combining the blasts and the fallouts, contributed to at least 220,000 deaths. The reasons the United States executed these bombings? Well, in a meeting with Secretary Stimson, Oppenheimer says to not underestimate the psychological impact of an atomic bomb, on top of the estimated 20 to 30,000 dead for a medium-sized city. It's the thought of the bomb's existence that can provide nightmare fuel, enough to enforce a surrender, while taking out tens of thousands in the process. Groves bluntly states that they plan to use two bombs, one to demonstrate its power, the second to reinforce they can keep going until Japan puts up a white flag. The American government was ruthless here. Yes, their plan was to end the war and bring their boys home, but to kill two lots of civilians, destroy two cities, double the damage, double volume for their message to be heard. However, there's a frighteningly casual nature to these decisions being made, including Kyoto being scratched off the potential target list because Stimson honeymooned there with his wife, and it's a magnificent city. Legitimately sparing those lives because of a personal sentimental attachment. But the people living in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, no such attachment, no honeymoons of men in power. They were considered insignificant enough on a cultural level to get rid of, converting the metrics of innocent lives into, essentially, a popularity contest. This scene was so eye-openingly shocking. The decisions were made, the bombs were dropped, which Nolan rightly chose not to depict in the film, only showing the perspective of the American side. Then, the shockwave, which chased Oppenheimer his entire life. He felt a tremendous amount of guilt, plagued by the impact of the atomic bomb. In the film's most terrifying scene, he addresses a crowd of students and panders to them. He doesn't want to, but he vocally supports the bombings, and that generates applause. This applause, in time, turns to sheer silence, Oppenheimer being lost in an inaudible state of numbness, the room shaking around him. The room then illuminates, a white flash akin to the Trinity blast, before seeing a young woman's flesh ripping apart in front of him. Then everyone turns to ash, before an atomic boom brings everyone back and he steps onto the charred remains of a child. Nolan directs this scene masterfully, like a psychological horror film, playing around with Oppenheimer's emotions, allowing him to imagine the sheer chaos that can be caused to ordinary people. He couldn't shake this off, stating to President Truman that he felt like he had blood on his hands, despite Truman telling him otherwise and describing him as a crybaby after exercising his empathy. This Truman scene is bloody chilling as well, with the disregard for human individuality. America is king, and he's the one who dropped the bomb, not Oppenheimer. Hiroshima wasn't about Oppenheimer. He's the real responsible force. Still, Oppenheimer is stalked by his discoveries. When interrogated in the security clearance hearing, the room flashes white like a nuclear blast when things become intense. Kitty tells him the world won't forgive him, and in a haunting final scene, at long last revealing Oppenheimer's chat with Albert Einstein next to a pond, it's said that they might have actually started a chain reaction that will destroy the world. We see Cillian Murphy's distraught thousand-yard stare, considering countless warheads in the sky at once, as the Earth is gradually covered by nuclear flames. In the film's introduction and within the film, Oppenheimer is compared to Prometheus, the man who stole fire from the gods to give to humanity, punished by being chained to a rock and being tortured for eternity. This is what inspired the 2005 biography American Prometheus, which this film was based upon, and that is a telling story that links succinctly with Oppenheimer, the man who unlocked that divine power for man to possess, a power that could end everything, and he was tortured by what was and what could have been for the rest of his days. As a movie, Oppenheimer is a terrifying insight into a brilliant scientist with questionable characteristics, a man who often put himself first and crawled into apology when bad results came his way. His goals were never truly personal, never truly for America, never truly for science, never truly for humanity. There were elements of all of the above, and also the occasional disregarding for all of the above, but everything wound up coming back to the same man with the poisoned apple, wanting to learn more about all things, no matter the consequences, until the consequences came knocking on his door. This eye-opening film finally takes its place on our Nightmare Fuel Hall of Fame. Do you agree? Let us know. I've been Connor from Unleash the Ghouls, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time, waiting with another deployment of Nightmare Fuel.